The first European to land on the shores of New Zealand was James Cook in 1769. He even counted the islands in the Bay of Islands. But he found people well established here. The Maori people from Polynesia had discovered the land they called Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. They'd come to New Zealand in their long canoes, and by 1300 were settled in both islands. Tupaia, a Tahitian high priest and navigator, could understand the Maori, and he drew this picture of the first conversation between Europeans and Maori, both interested in trade and learning about each other. The Bay of Islands in the north of New Zealand was an attractive place for both Maori and Europeans. There was a lot of good seafood available here. We loved to see the dolphins swimming around our boat. And there were shelter places for boats to be moored. One of the early settlements was Pahaia on the mainland of the Bay of Islands, and some missionaries built the first Christian church there. This church was built about 100 years ago on the site of the original church, and it was here that the first translation of the Maori New Testament was printed. One small hut from those early days remains in Pahaia, once a house of the missionaries, then a school and a barn, and now a tiny museum. The major European settlement was Russell. Most of the Europeans here were sealers, whalers, and escaped convicts. It was described as a hellhole with rampant prostitution, alcoholism, and violence. Who could imagine that now, with its pretty Anglican church and its Catholic mission? The Maoris were concerned at this behaviour of the Europeans and suggested that someone should be appointed to keep order amongst the settlers. The British government appointed an official British resident, James Busby, who arrived in 1832 and set up this house north of Pahaia, just across the water from Russell. He was warmly welcomed by the Maori chiefs, and he welcomed them. He said, "It is my wish, when I have erected my house, that all the chiefs shall visit me and be my friends, and we shall then consult together by what means they can make their country flourishing and their people rich and wise, like the people of Great Britain." One step was to call the Maori chiefs together and formulate a document in which the chiefs declared that New Zealand was an independent country. Known as the Declaration of Independence, it was duly accepted by the British government. But in 1840, the Sydney government sent Captain William Hobson to New Zealand with the purpose of making a full treaty with the Maori. With the help of James Busby and Henry Williams, the missionary who had founded the Church of Pahaia and who could speak Maori well, Hobson began developing a treaty which he hoped would set up a good relationship with the Maori, while giving the British a high degree of control. Maori chiefs, Hongi Heke and Tamati Wakanini, assisted in the process. There were 3 articles in the treaty. One, that the Queen of England was given the right to govern the land. Second, the Maori would have full ownership over their land, villages and treasures, but could sell them to the Queen and her agents at agreed prices. And thirdly, that the Maori would have the protection and rights and privileges of British subjects. The Waitangi Treaty was first signed at Government House on the Bay of Islands in 1840. It was then taken around New Zealand so chiefs in both islands could sign. There was a lot of discussion, and some Maori chiefs signed it while others did not, fearful of losing their independence. One of the major issues was the understanding of land. For the Maori people belonged to the Mother Earth. They had a responsibility to look after it and could invite others to use its resources. But there was no sense of people owning the land. For the British, the land was a commodity and gave owners rights to do whatever they wanted to do. In 1861, for example, coal was found at Kawakawa, and the first train track was built to take the coal to ships on the coast. Mother Earth was being removed. It was not long before wars between the Maori and the Europeans began. The Maori thought that governance should be shared, but the British did not behave that way. And over the years, the British developed colonial powers, ignoring the treaty very often, and the rights of the Maori people. Even today, there are different interpretations of what the treaty means and how the Maori should be treated. The treaty was not perfect, but it is a reminder of a relationship that began with some mutual recognition. A relationship which is still being worked out in many parts of the world between First Peoples and European colonisers. And it can form the basis of trust and goodwill.